I've lived in Mercersburg all my life, and my parents were living at 24 North Main Street, and that's where I was born. And I just celebrated my 90th birthday on August the 16th of this year, and I was born in 1923. So I grew up in Mercersburg, went to the public schools, and one of my best friends lives in Emmitsburg now. His name's Earl Rice, and he and I backyards were very close to one another, so naturally we grew up together, went through grade school, high school, went to the academy for a year together, and we still maintain contact. He lives in Emmitsburg and with his family, and of course we're here in Mercersburg. So I didn't get into the service until 1942. No, 43.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Can you relate the story as to what happened on Pearl Harbor for you?
Oh, yeah. This was after our school days, and I was going to the academy at that time, and this girl that I was going with was high school sweetheart, that sort of thing, and we were, she was home for a weekend. So we just took a walk out into the countryside someplace on that Sunday afternoon, December the 7th, 1941. And one of our classmates was driving out that way. He was going to pick us up because we wouldn't get back in time, so that had been prearranged. And when he picked us up, he said, the country's at war, Japan just bombed Pearl Harbor, something to that effect. So that's what where I was on Pearl Harbor Day. And then I went to, as I said, I was going to the academy then for a year and sang in the church choir. And Dr. Tibbetts was the headmaster, and he called a special chapel meeting service that evening for the entire school to be there for that. And the choir, of course, was in their choir stall and sang some songs, and we knew what was going on. And he announced about the attack on Pearl Harbor, and I can still see him up at the altar, or up at the lectern, saying that we were now engaged in World War, and his tears were coming down his cheek. He had been a veteran of World War I, and he had a pretty good idea of what the country was embarked on at that point in our lives. So I didn't return to the academy in the spring, or in the fall of 1942. I knew that I would be going into the service very shortly, so a lot of my friends had already gone in, and I didn't want to wait on the draft, so I went to the tannery, talked to Mr. Byron, who was a good friend of my father, and who was head of the draft board here in this country, or this county, or this town, not the county, and expressed my desire, said I want to go when the next group goes in January. And as I said, he said, does your daddy know you want to do this? I said, I have permission. So that's the way that ended up. And January the 11th of 43, I went to Harrisburg for my first physical with a busload from Greencastle, and was sworn into the Army at that day. Went home for a week to settle up what you had in your business life or whatever, and then I went from Mercersburg to Greencastle. My dad took me down there. All of us got on a bus, and we ended up at George Meade Camp as an induction center, and went through that. I guess we were there for maybe 10 or 12 days to be outfitted in uniforms and classified and that sort of thing. And there was one fellow who was stayed with me during that classification who was from here, and we both ended up in Field Artillery Observation Battalion, the 285th, that was forming, and we went out to Oklahoma. Long train ride. Man, it was it must have been about 3 days going out there on the train. And that's where we had our basic training.
Now, you said you was forming the artillery unit before you before you went to basic. So when you went to basic training, were you training as artillery or were you training as infantry?
We were training as Field Artillery Observation Battalion. That's what we went into, and you don't shoot guns in that. You locate the enemy gun by the sound that it makes and by the flash that it makes. There's a sound platoon and a flash platoon and a survey platoon. If you want to stop this for a minute, I can go get you a book that shows you
Sure.
a little more. After we got finished with our work in Camp Gruber, that's where we went through basic training, getting ready for maneuvers. And we finally left Camp Gruber and journeyed by motor coach, or took our trucks and all, to Louisiana. About 2 days before we had all this hurry up and do this sort of thing and get ready to go, my first cousin, who had just completed and was made a second lieutenant, came to Oklahoma, and he was with the division from New York. He had been assigned there, and he was moved into Camp Gruber. And I learned about this through a telephone conversation I had with my parents at home, and they, Harold Freeze will be there, and maybe you can see him. Well, I found out where he was, and it was the day before we were to leave in a troop convoy to start south, and I went to Captain Marshall, real great guy, and I said, Captain, my first cousin from, I guess I was a buck sergeant by that time. I had gone up a little bit, and he's here now. I wonder if I could get a couple hours just to go see him. I haven't seen him since he got in service. Sure, he said. He says, I'll give you a requisition for a Jeep and you know where to go. He did, and we had a couple of hours together, and that was real nice. He went eventually over into Europe and was wounded over there, but he recovered from that all right, and came back and lived in Bedford for a long time. But he's been gone now, 8, 9 years anyway. But he was a little older than I was. But that was a nice gesture that the captain did to. And we went to Louisiana. It took about 3 days troop movement, going in convoy down to Louisiana, and we were down there. I think we were supposed to be there for about a month on maneuvers, and I got pulled out to go to sound ranging school, and that was at in Oklahoma camp. There's a big camp there in Oklahoma. Can't think of the name of it right at the moment, but there was about 3 of us that were pulled out of sound ranging to go to this sound ranging school where you learned how to repair the machines and that sort of thing, and a little bit more about the operation of them. And we did that, and after we got out of that, why, our outfit went out to California, and we did maneuvers out in the desert in California. Camp Beale, California was where we were, for Camp Roberts for a short time. Then I was selected to go to up above Scranton, Pennsylvania, to a school there where they were doing sound ranging testing with the new sound ranging equipment that was being made in New Jersey. And this was a civilian. We worked with civilians up there and with the Army both. And we would go out at nights and do sound ranging at the camp up there. Mine's just not with it. I can't think of the name of the camp up there, but nevertheless, that's where that was. And there were civilians who stayed at a hotel up there. And we stayed, of course, at the camp that was close by, and they furnished us rations and all that. But a lot of the study work was done at the hotel at this little town up in Pennsylvania. And there were 5 or 6 women who had worked at Red Bank, New Jersey, was where the sound machine were perfected and brought out to us. And we did that, and that was one of the first times I got home. I got a weekend to come from up near Scranton down to Mercersburg, and I did that maybe 3 or 4 times that I could arrange it. I get off. We only did our sound ranging at night, and we'd finish up Friday night, and then you wouldn't do anything Saturday or Sunday. And so I'd leave early Saturday morning to catch a bus, come to Mercersburg, and then get back in time for Monday night's work. And managed to get a few times at home. And then we went back out to Fort Ord. That's where it was in California. And shortly thereafter, they broke up that outfit, and we were sent to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where we formed the 6th 17th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. And that's where I eventually went through that, got up to be a tech sergeant and in sound platoon, and then we went overseas.
Do you remember what month or what the day was when you left to go overseas?
It was in the early spring, because we got over there. It was sometime. Oh, it was around Easter time. Now, I know that I remember that was the time we were on the ship, and the ship was called the SS Manhattan, but that's what it was as a commercial passenger ship, big liner, and they renamed it the Wakefield, and we went overseas on the Wakefield. In fact, I have a model of that ship up in the train room at the academy. That model is that long.
Wow.
And there were 7,000 on the ship when we went over, and that's not including the crew. And it was run by the Coast Guard, and we were 7 or 8 days going from Newport News over to Naples, Italy. And that was pretty quick time. We went by ourselves because the activities in the sea had deteriorated to such a point that there wasn't much alarm, but we were never allowed out on the outside the ship, out up on board or out on the deck during the nighttime hours, and and the bunks were 7 high in the basement. And we got over there, and then that's where we picked up our equipment, our trucks, our sound equipment, and everything. And then we got on another small Italian ship, just our battalion, and went up and went in at Venice, Italy. And from there on, we got involved in the Po Valley campaign and went all through to the east, and then up through the northern part as far as Switzerland. And that Po Valley campaign was the only one that I was involved in. And after the war was over, while we were in a town called Serrano, Italy, we stayed took over a high school building, and our battery was in that building, and we had a place where we could keep our trucks and that sort of thing. And I was designated as one to go to Milan to get movies from the special services, and we had a movie projector, and we'd have them in the gymnasium of the school, fixed up a screen and all. And some of the fellows were going with some of the girls out in the town, and they brought them, but the parents always came with them, or one of the parents always came with them. And we were there for maybe 2-3 months. Then they moved us out to a place, it was a airfield, Lucca Air Base, and it was about a day's travel from Serrano, and we had tents there, and we were there awaiting transportation to come back to the States. But to get to Bari, which is on the east coast of Italy and is a seaport, we had to ride from where we were at Lucca Air Base in a train. Very modern cattle car train. We were on that for 3 days and 2 nights. Slow and agonizing, but we got to Bari, and then we got on a ship that brought us back to the States, but that took 17 days. It was a very long and tiresome trip, but we got back to Newport News, and then I got 30 days furlough from there home, and with the orders to return to what's the camp here in Harrisburg?
Not
Indiantown Gap.
Fort Indiantown Gap.
Fort Indiantown Gap, and there transportation would be provided to take you to Fort Hood, Texas, and that's where we ended up. And that was all planned so far ahead that we were going to be getting ready to go to Japan from there, but of course that war ended before any of that could occur, and that's where ultimately we ended up. And I was just trying to think, Jim, can't think of that guy's name yet. Anyway, that's where I got my Dear John letter. Turn that thing off.
Sure.
I'd gotten back to the States, and we did some preliminary work with the idea that maybe we'd be going over to Japan, but that never happened. They broke up our outfit down in Fort Hood, Texas, and because most of the men in that had points enough to get out. They were married fellas. They were older than the draftees that were coming in later on that they sent over to Japan, and I was just lucky, I guess. They thought I ought to stay in the service, and I had seriously considered that. They offered me schooling, and I thought about that, and then I thought about maybe I could get out and go to school on my own. Down in Texas, a lot of oil wells, and thought about going to the University of Colorado and perhaps work in the oil fields in some capacity sometime. But being an only child, my parents didn't think too much of that. They'd rather I'd come home. So the day I got my papers to leave Camp Hood, I had my gear in the car, and I drove the car into Fort Worth, and found a used car lot, and I drove it in. The guy come out, and I said, "What do you give me for it?" He says, "About $400. I said, "No, I got to have more than that." Well, he says, "I'll go $450. I said, "You go $500. You've bought it." He bought it for $500, and he opened up the trunk, and there was 2 5-gallon GI cans of gasoline in there, because the motor pool sergeant, he and I were great friends.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, "What am I going to do with them?" I says, "I don't know. You just bought them." And so I left there, and I thought, well, I've got money now. I'm going to fly home. It was a damn sight more money than I had the other time I went home. And I couldn't get flights. You could go to an airport and wait for a government plane to come in and all that. Maybe they'd take you up to Boston, and then you'd have. So I got on a train and came home. Took me 2 days, but I got chair reservations the whole way home from Fort Worth, Dallas, on up to St. Louis, and from St. Louis into Harrisburg. And I had called my parents, and my dad met me at Harrisburg.
So now when you get home, are you have you been discharged at that point?
No, I had not been formally discharged. I was to report at Indiantown Gap for my discharge, and I had a few days to get there. And when I take all my papers, and I just kind of went in rough clothes to go to that. When I got there, they issued me all new clothes because I was being discharged. And in fact, you don't know where Barnes's Point is, but it's out here at Route 416 and interstates with 30.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my dad's car then. I drove the Buick and went out there, and a guy standing there waving me down. What's wrong? He says, you forgot all your papers. They're still back at home. Your dad called here. You got to take them before you can get discharged. I'd turn around and go back and get papers. I didn't have any problem after that. And I came back and ultimately I ended up at Bliss Electrical School in Washington. It was about a 12-month course down there, about a full year, not just a school year. Got through that, came back here, and got a job with the electric company installing ranges and water heaters. And, did that for a couple of years, and eventually I quit the light company because I didn't see much future there, and I had a gas station here in town, and right up where we lived on Main Street, and the fellow that had run it had died, and somebody else, my dad says, why don't you run that for a while and see what you do? And I did for maybe 6 or 8 months or so, and I got another call to go back to the light company in line department. So that's what I did, and that's where I ended up my years, sitting here talking to you.
Well, can we go back to before you went overseas in 1943?
Mm-hmm.
You were telling me earlier about the sleeping bag story. I'd like to get that on camera if you don't mind.
Okay. About when I headed overseas.
Yeah, how you got it, or how you
Okay.
purchased it, and then ultimately what happened with it overseas.
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready. Go ahead.
It's all you.
You have it on?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, when we were getting ready to pack all of our equipment to go overseas, and we knew in advance that we were going to go, as a enlisted man without not an officer, I realized that I might have some inconveniences as far as sleeping is concerned with the 2 blankets that they give you. So I bought a bedroll. And I used it a couple of times just to kind of get used to it in the barracks, and then I put it in one of the crates of the equipment that was being shipped overseas. It was going to follow us overseas or precede us, I don't know how, but it got there anyway. And lo and behold, I got the bedroll. And I used it quite often over there. And the other fellows just had, 2 blankets, and in one place they had boards for bunks, and that was it. But I had a little better comfort that way, and I remember towards the last, when we were rapidly moving through western and northern parts of Italy, going here and there, one night we stopped right outside a little town and retired, and I threw my bedroll out on the ground, and I got in that, and most of them just stayed in the trucks. They'd spread their blankets out and sleep in the trucks or someplace, maybe some going around. But anyway, I was awakened the next morning with somebody feeling the material of the bedroll, and it was an old Italian lady, and she was smiling down. Didn't have many teeth, I do remember that. And she was smiling down at me and going that way, like the material's good on. And I said, yeah, I agreed with her, and she went on her way. I don't know what she was doing out that early in the morning, but I guess they got up early. It was a farming community, and there was a lot of farms in there. A lot of the farms had been destroyed by the war, but yet they were still trying to eke a living out growing things. That's about the story of the sleeping bag. And I did manage to get it back to the States too, and it came back when I came back, so that's about it.
Now, how did you carry it with you when you were traveling? Where would you store it?
On one of the trucks. We had 2 Jeeps, we had 3 weapons carriers, and we had 3 2.5 ton trucks, two 4x4 2.5 ton that carried all of our equipment, and we'd stow a lot of stuff in those things, and that's how we didn't do any great deal of marching. I'll tell you, that was a thing that we weren't involved in. And our job I'll try to describe it a little to you. We had microphones and I'll get that book to you somehow. I'll find it someplace. They're maybe 6 inches in diameter, and they stood about that high. And they were very receptive to the sound of artillery, to the low boom. And if you've ever been at a farm pond and you've thrown a stone out in the water, you notice it concentric circles come back from the point where that went in. As they come back, they are reduced in their size. Their magnitude is reduced as they come back. And we would set up a string of maybe 4 to 6 microphones, what we called a mic base, and that would intercept or hear that sound of a piece of artillery that was maybe a mile or 2 miles back of the line and shooting at us. And the time that it took that sound to hit one microphone and then another, they were in a concentric circle. It wasn't a full circle, it was just an arc like. And you would measure that time with the machine that we had that was called a sound recorder. And it had the equipment in it that it would bring out a 35 millimeter tape, and that tape showed when the sound hit the various microphones. And the difference between the time that it hit the different microphones, you would take, say, 2 and 3, or 1 and 2, and 3 and 4, the difference in time, and you could plot that on a map with coordinates, and where they would cross, well, that was where the source of the sound came from. That's how you located it. And the other platoon, flash platoon, did the same thing, and they would try to observe the flash that came from the gun burst, not the shell burst, but the gun burst of where the gun was. And it was kind of crude, but yet it was efficient at that time. But now, they can locate stuff a whole lot quicker. But that was what our purpose was in the service. And
what was your specific job duty for that?
Well, when my first job I had was an electrician, and that carried a corporal's grade. Then I went up to sound maintenance, and that carried a buck sergeant stripe. Then I was in charge of the sound platoon, and that gave me a tech sergeant, two rockers underneath. And then after I got back to the States, I made master sergeant, and that would have been in charge of both platoons, both sound and survey platoons. See, we had to have those microphones surveyed in, and there was a survey platoon that would do that, and that was under in the what do they call it, the ETO or whatever, the table of organization. That's what that was. And that was my rank when I got out. And I don't know, I had the chance to go to OCS. I had a good enough score from the tests that you had, and I was undetermined what I wanted. My parents thought you ought to do that. You'd be safer there, you know. But I knew the fellows that I was with, and finally I asked the my battery commander. I had an interview with him one day. I wanted to see him. I said, I'm in a quandary and I wanted to know what you would recommend. And I told him what it was about. Well, he said, you have qualified for going to OCS. Now, if you go to OCS and you're successful, you'll come out as a second lieutenant in the field artillery. If you fail and don't come out, you're going to be a private in the field artillery. You don't retain your rank when you go into the OCS. And I thought about that, and I said, well, I knew all these guys, and I was doing pretty good and making fairly good money over what some of the other ones were, as far as being a staff sergeant and then a tech sergeant. So I just decided I was going to stay where I was, and I could probably be of more use there than flunking out of OCS. Because I ain't the brightest bulb in the line, I'll tell you. But I think I made a right decision at that time. I don't know what the other course could have brought, but that's what I did. And, yep. So other than that, I like my word processor.
All right. Well, is there any funny stories that you can remember from overseas?
Probably is, but I can't think of them right now. I can't pull them up. I would, I'll have to think about that a while. Maybe you can come back again sometime and we can think over some more. I'd love to get that book that has a breakdown of all of the parts of the sound ranging equipment and how you go about it. And I'm sure it's here someplace, but I just have not been able to lay my hand on it. But you can see with the books I've got here, the books out there. And on top of that, belong to the Historic Society here in Mercersburg Historic Society. And I have to give a dissertation in September how electricity came to Mercersburg.
Wow.
And I've done a lot of research on that, and that should be pretty interesting. Mercersburg, Laymasters, and Marks Electric Company was the first thing. And that was because there was a water mill out at Marks. That's about 5-6 miles out of town here. Big flour mill, and they had a water wheel in there. And the men decided that they'd generate electricity there back in about 1903, and they proposed it to the town. If they bring the electricity to town, would the town purchase it and that sort of thing? And ultimately, that's what happened. And it's interesting that Mercersburg had the electricity before each of McConnellsburg and Greencastle. Neither one of those towns had water, a source for energy to turn their generators. They had to bring in, well, it wasn't a gasoline engine, it was a oil, what do they call them, oil pull engines. They were like old steam engines, and that's what they had to generate their electricity with, and they were a few years after ours. But It's all kind of interesting, and what I've gathered together over the years on that, and how the one fella they put it in Greencastle, and one fella decided he had a photographer shop, and he was going to put the electricity in. He did. And one summer, well, you paid your own bill and you paid for your own meter at that time. And one summer he decided he wasn't going to use the electricity. He turned it off. But he got a bill for 3 cents for the rent on his meter, even though he didn't use it. And he took him to court and fought that for 3 cents. And he ended up paying $5 cost for the... He wasn't too smart, but
it was the principle.
Yeah, the principle of the thing. But damn if he's going to pay that 3 cents.
Wow. Well, thank you for the interview and for your time.
Well, that's all right. I'm not doing anything else, and I'll try to get that book together, and I'll give you some